Question that I would like to address to all of you, and I would like to make it the center of our reflections. Do artificial faces really exist? A semiotic conundrum. So, on August the 3rd, 2019, convicted drug dealer Clovino da Silva tried to escape the prison of Rio de Janeiro during a visit of his 19-year-old daughter. The Brazilian criminal sought to impersonate her by wearing a silicone mask, a wig, eyeglasses, and teenager's attire, swap places, and leave the detention center under false pretenses. Policemen, though, became suspicious about the teenager's strange behavior and arrested the fugitive, recording on video the moment of his undressing. Clovino da Silva then hanged himself in a confinement jail 3 days later. His criminal plan would have probably succeeded had he worn one of the resin masks printed in 3D by Real Face, the Japanese company created by Osamu Kitagawa. The same kind of mask would have served probably the purposes of French-Israeli citizen Gilbert Chicly, nicknamed by French policemen the King of Fraud, who in summer 2015 convinced several donors from around the world to transfer to him enormous sums of money. He did so through impersonating, this time through a latex mask, the then French Minister of Defense Jean-Yves Le Drian, claiming the necessity to finance the French government's fight against terrorism. The face is both a biologically and culturally a compelling sign of identity. Members of the human species show their faces in order to be distinguished from others, and at the same time observe others' faces so as to determine their identity. Natural evolution has selected as adaptive both the human genetic characteristic of having a face that somatically looks different from any other, and the human neurophysiological ability to tell faces apart and recognize them. Some faces look more similar than others, as it happens with monozygotic twins, for instance, and some individuals might genetically be more apt than others at distinguishing and recognizing faces, yet these parts of the body have been essential signs of human personal identity for most human history, at least until Frenchman Alphonse Bertillon introduced forensic anthropometry in 1883. And this is a mugshot of Alphonse Bertillon himself. Even in the Bertillonage, as this anthropometric method would be called, though, measurements of head length, crown to forehead, head width, temple to temple, width mentioned earlier, width of cheeks and length of the right ear remained essential. Moreover, the same Bertillon introduced mugshots so as to assist through the new medium of photography the identification of individuals. Semiotics, as many of you already know, is the discipline that studies everything that can be used to lie, as Umberto Eco, one of the founding fathers of the discipline, wittily defined it. Lies are also a central issue in forensics, which precisely seeks to detect and uncover the truth behind those lies that are used to organize, commit, and conceal crimes. Although the face is a natural sign, it also can be used to mislead. Individuals, for instance, can seek not to show their faces in the preparation or in the perpetration of a crime. They can cover them. They can wear a mask or adopt a false countenance. They can impersonate other people by donning alternative faces, or rather a simulacrum of them. But faces can lie also when they are not concealed, covered, masked, or made up. For, as it has been underlined at least since Augustine on, facial expressions themselves can be displayed so as to lie about one's cognitive, emotional, or pragmatic status. As specifically regards the face, then, a long period dialectics takes place between the criminal possibility to lie about or through the face and the societal effort to detect and unmask such felonious lies. Representing the face first through a visual B, drawing, painting, engraving, photograph, then 3, sculpture, and now moving, film, hologram, artifact, has a long history, for facial representations are found also in the prehistorical sites that you so aptly study. Yet, the idea of using the verbal or visual representation of an individual's face in order to identify it, identify her or him, is relatively more recent. In Western history, only divinized Roman emperors could have their effigies represented on coins when they were still alive, and that was not meant to help their identification, but on the contrary, the identification and validation of coins themselves. One of the first instances of identification of lay people through the description of their faces is the late 14th century, so we go to the Middle Ages, Libro del Pellegrino, Pilgrim's Book, kept in the medieval Pilgrims' Hospital of Santa Maria della Scala, Siena, which is also my alma mater. Here, pilgrims coming from the four corners of Europe and bound to Rome used to deposit their values together with a description of their persona that also included a verbal representation of their countenance. The systematic adoption of visual representations of faces as identification means started with photography, whose invention slightly predates the Bertillon method, and as it was mentioned earlier, was turned by the French criminologist himself into an anthropometric device, the invention of mugshots. These, however, were soon replaced by fingerprints as more effective signs for the identification of individuals and potential criminals. As the founding fathers of U.S. semiotics, Charles Sanders, Sebastian Peirce, would have pointed out at the turn of the 19th century, however, representations of the face and representations of fingerprints do not semiotically work in the same way. Before the invention of photography, facial representations were mostly icons, that is, signs representing their objects through a relation of similarity. In drawings, paintings, and engravings, however, the symbolical dimension, in Peirce the dimension of conventionality, was never completely absent. The artist's style, for instance, would influence the depiction. There were some predominantly indexical facial representations too, that is, representations motivated by a physical link between the object and the sign, but they were rare and seldom used for identification purposes. Funerary masks molded after the faces of deceased people, for instance, and in homage to Warsaw, here you have the funerary mask of Chopin that you can see in this wonderful museum that is the Chopin Museum, which is close by, and I strongly recommend you to visit it. But in this case too, Auguste Clésinger, who was the artist who made the funerary mask of Chopin, because funerary masks, death masks, were usually prepared by artists, thought that the first mold that he took was not representative of the artist because the artist was already too sick. So he created a second mold which was indexical but at the same time with sort of a post-production in order to have the relic of the face of Chopin look better. Other facial images of this kind would be mythical, like Acheiropoieta images of the face of Jesus, and of course the most famous one is in Turin, the Holy Shroud. So the task of identifying people was therefore, up to the invention of photography, demanded to other signs, such as seals. Seals, indeed, are everywhere in the Middle Ages, up to the Renaissance, and are predominantly indexical signs, meaning that their objects, the seal's bearer, is in temporal and spatial contiguity with them. Upon the invention of photography, facial representations started to work as visual seals. Analogic photographs were the causal result of the camera's exposition to a certain configuration of light, which was, of course, modified by the presence of a face. Although anatomists overlooked for a long time the uniqueness of fingerprints and their potentiality as identity markers, two episodes outside of the domain of anatomy drew attention on it. So what I'm trying to represent here, both historically and semiotically, is the passage from an epoch in which mostly indexes were used to identify people, seals for instance, to an epoch in which photographs became a sort of a visual index to identify people. But as I will tell you, it was soon discovered that these visual signs were not reliable. In 1903, a man by the name of Will West was detained in the penitentiary of Leavenworth, Kansas. Authorities, however, found out that the prisoner by the name of William West, so almost the same name, was already in a detention center, looked quite similar to the new inmate, and had almost the same Bertillon measurements. That was the end of the Bertillon system, because the photograph was not, the mugshot was not enough to identify the supposed criminal. The anthropometric measurements were not enough to identify them, and they almost had the same name. So the episode discredited such anthropometric method, which has been in use for over 1 century around the world. By the way, when the Mona Lisa was stolen from the Louvre by an Italian artist, two young assistants of the Louvre were present during the theft. Probably you remember their names. One of them was Pablo Picasso, and the other one was Guillaume Apollinaire. And they were both interrogated by the police of Paris because they were suspected of being the thieves of Mona Lisa. And Bertillon was there participating in the interrogations. And Pablo Picasso, who had actually stolen something from the Louvre himself, but only some statuettes, as he admitted, was declared innocent because his left fingerprint did not coincide with the left fingerprint that was left on the glass shield that would cover the Mona Lisa in the Louvre. So already the fingerprint was fundamental in order to declare Pablo Picasso innocent of the theft of Mona Lisa. Now, someone could probably write a novel about it, or maybe someone has already. So, the episode, as I said, discredited such anthropometric method, which had been used for over 1 century around the world, revealing that its measurements were too vague to discriminate among individuals, especially in times of generalized surveillance and a mass detention. At the same time, the episode also exposed the untrustworthiness of mugshots. The photographic device and the format were indeed standardizing facial pictures, thus decreasing their usefulness for identity detection and discrimination. Later on, it would have been found out that human beings are also generally more apt at distinguishing among faces within their own ethnic groups than outside of it. So a Caucasian policeman that would probably, not only for racist reasons, but also for cognitive reasons, mistake Afro-American visages among themselves. The second episode, at the opposite corner of the world, led to the conclusion that whereas cameras would be complicated and mostly unreliable devices for the production of indexical representations of faces, also because these representations were mostly received as iconic signs, that is, by virtue of their supposed resemblance to their objects, fingerprints could be made significant through a much less complicated and reliable technology. The first modern instance of it emerged in history in British colonial India, where Sir William James Herschel, Chief Magistrate of the Hooghly district in Janjipur, had the fingerprints of Rajyadar Konai, a local businessman, impressed as signs of personal identification on a contract in 1858. This is the first officially used fingerprint in history, in Western history. Well, Western history, but with an Indian touch. It's a complicated story, but I don't have time to tell it. So the same procedure was then adopted for native contracts in the following 57 years, initially with footprints of right palms, then reduced to fingerprints of right middle fingers, and don't show it to here, see. And from the semiotic perspective, the first fingerprints ever used for legal purposes would therefore add extra semiotic value, not to photographs but to signatures. So they were taken so as to impress the natives in a way. Indeed, from the semiotic point of view, both were icons working as indexes by virtue of their resemblance to a prototype, the difference yet being that the prototype of a signature is a conventional index traced with a writing instrument, whereas the prototype of a fingerprint is the finger itself, that is a natural limb. In the following years, techniques and technologies for the production and observation of these signs improved considerably. An important step in the semiotic history of fingerprints took place in 1914 when Håkon Jørgensen from the Copenhagen, Denmark police lectured at the International Police Conference in Munich about the possibility of sending fingerprints through telegraphic communication. Fingerprints were indexically used icons. They were therefore analogic artifacts whose shape would be created through physical contiguity with finger ridges and would signify through pattern resemblance with them. Jørgensen first proposed translating such analogic signs into digital ones through the binary code of the Morse alphabet. An English description of the method was first published in Copenhagen in 1922 under the title of Distant Identification. Let us presume that the person arrested in Stockholm is identical with a sought-for burglar from Paris. The description of the arrested person tallies with that of the one wanted, but the arrested person denies the identity and might also possibly carry such credentials as show him to be identical with a French merchant traveling on business. The police suspect him immediately of carrying false credentials. How can the Stockholm police decide the case? And this is the rationale for making fingerprinting from analogic in binary, digital in a way. So by 2012, we skip almost 1 century of progress and evolution in fingerprinting. Interpol's automatic fingerprint identification system repository in the US contained more than 150,000 sets of fingerprints for important international criminal records from 190 member countries. Currently, in 2020, the US Department of Homeland Security's Office of Biometric Identity Management, OBIM, contains over 120 million persons' fingerprints. Fast capture technology presently enables recording of 10 simultaneous fingerprint impressions in circa 15 seconds per person. India, which everything started, has actually the largest digital database of fingerprints in the world, which is a nice coincidence. It is known as Aadhaar and contains 1.11 billion digital images of fingerprints. So why am I talking about fingerprints? Because, of course, the electronic fingerprint recognition feature known as Touch ID has been sold by Apple as part of all iPhones since 2013's iPhone 5S up until 2017's iPhone 8 and 8 Plus. It has been on all iPads since 2014's iPad Air 2, except for 2018's iPad Pro 3rd generation. In 2015, Apple introduced a faster second-generation Touch ID in the iPhone 6s, and a year later, in 2016, it was also integrated in the MacBook Pro, so exactly in this kind of computer that now I can open with my fingerprint. On the right side of the touch bar and in the 2018 MacBook Air. The identification of human beings through indexical and iconic impressions of their finger ridges was developed as a way for societal law enforcement agencies to single out citizens and, above all, potential criminals. The digitalization of this anthropometric technique, though, led to its miniaturization and integration into portable personal devices such as smartphones, tablets, and computers. In the frame of the history of communication, this process entails that these devices and their data become the exclusive territory that fingerprints are meant to protect. So this is the frontier of my world, in a way, that I protect with my own fingerprints. There is a reverse of the medal, though. Whilst the users protect their devices and data through impressions of their bodies, these devices have potential access to the same signs and identity marks that they, the user, present so as to be identified by state apparatuses, for instance, at frontier controls around the world. So I use the same fingerprint to enter my computer and to enter the United States. There is no difference. There is, moreover, a critical difference between passing a frontier control by demonstrating one's identity through fingerprints and unlocking a smartphone with Touch ID. Whereas in the first case, a whole system of human and machinic surveillance makes sure that the impressions are actually indexically connected to a living body. In the second case, devices only presuppose that the fingerprint actually belongs to a finger. In September 2013, the biometrics hacking team of the Chaos Computer Club, CCC, very smart guys, successfully bypassed the biometric security of Apple's Touch ID. A fingerprint of the phone user, photographed from a glass surface, was used to create a fake finger that could unlock an iPhone 5s secured with Touch ID. In practice, CCC used the same method that in detective stories is adopted to inculpate someone by leaving his or her fingerprint impressions on the crime scene. Frank Rosengart, CCC spokesperson, concluded, I quote, "The fingerprint as security feature loses more and more of its value the more biometric verification systems use it as a feature. The same fingerprint which is scanned in high resolution at a grocery store shall be used at the border for verification. No customer can verify if the high resolution fingerprint is stored anyway." And these are, of course, machines working on their own, as I'm trying to demonstrate. The adoption of biometric security procedures for personal and portable devices cannot be understood in purely technical terms. As these devices become the